And in the end, Randal, as Paul puts it in his book, this is ultimately about just coercive force, that God has morally sufficient reasons to use even what may seem like severe punishments and judgments and so on in these scenarios. But it is not ethnic cleansing. It is not genocide. Equally, God may judge the Israelites themselves, when they do not follow his commands and so on. But you do class this as genocide. Do you want to explain why that is, and why you don't buy this idea that Paul has that ultimately, as severe as it may seem, there can be good reasons for God to use this just coercive force to achieve these ends?
Okay, so Deuteronomy 7:2-5 and Deuteronomy 20:16-17 are really probably the most important passages. Paul has a great and nuanced discussion of these passages, and there's much there that I would want to affirm, including clearly there's exaggeration in there, like destroy them totally, make no treaty with them, show them no mercy, etc. Do not leave alive anything that breathes. I accept that this is sort of formulaic language, hyperbolic in nature. However, the main point here nonetheless is to eradicate the Canaanite presence within the promised land. And that certainly is ethnic cleansing. Because ethnic cleansing, now it's not a technical legal term in international law, but it's been in common currency for about 30 years since Bosnia. And it is the forcible removal of a group based upon their ethnicity, their race, or their culture or religion, which I think clearly applies to the forcible expulsion of Canaanites from the land. Now, in terms of this qualifying as genocide, Paul quotes from the Waltons in their book, I forget the title, of
the
Lost World of the Canaanites.
The Lost World.
The Israelite Conquest, yeah.
So he refers to them, and they say, well, the idea here is to harem an identity, in other words, Canaanite identity. He quotes them on page 212. The focus is less on individuals that are Canaanites. The essential issue is the removal of identity markers of Canaanite religion and morality. But that actually just is what genocide is. So if you go to the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, quote, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. And then it lists things like killing members of the group, causing severe mental or physical bodily distress to the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life that are calculated to bring about its destruction. The kind of things that Canada did to First Nations people when we forcibly removed First Nations individuals from their homes and put them in state-run schools so that they would not learn their culture anymore and they would instead learn English and forget their original culture and language. That is genocide. That's what it is. When you're attempting to remove the markers of Canaanite identity as a forcible action, a program, that is genocide. So I think, yes, this does end up being genocide. Now, the last thing I'll just add is Paul, as he did with the Amalekites earlier, comparing them to Nazis, he also does that comparing Canaanites to Nazis. And I think that that's simply a false analogy.
I did not do that. I didn't compare them to Nazis. I said...
What was the...
Page
you did mention the Nazis.
I do mention the Nazis, but I don't compare them to Nazis.
Okay, well, at page 212, okay, you say, if Canaanites continue to dwell in the land, but their identity markers were removed, then the threat to Israel would be defanged, just as the removal of Nazi identity markers in Germany removed the destruction pernicious threat without killing German civilians. So in that sense, the point then is if the Allied forces came into Germany and forcibly prevented Germans from speaking German and tore down all the German signs and gave them English names, and destroyed German literature, and if you spoke German in your house, you would be imprisoned, that would qualify as genocidal actions on behalf of the Allied forces. And I think you're trying to make it more palatable by shifting from talking about the Canaanites as analogous to Germans to talking about them as analogous to a fascist ideology that happened to thrive within Germany for a decade and a half. It's simply disanalogous, and so I don't think it's helpful.
Well, couldn't you say that Nazism was the religion of the people? They certainly treated Hitler as a divine-like figure, and everything was revolving around their own ethnic identity, Aryan identity, and that this motivated them. And of course, if that's their religion and you have the Allies coming in and defanging the German people of Nazism, and of course, people who fought, they lost their lives. But as the Waltons say, and again, it's not as though I'm using my own analogy, I'm using the Waltons' analogy, and they're saying that largely the German people were left intact. That the identity of the people that had a pernicious influence was dismantled, and so they tore down the flags, they removed the monuments, they vilified the ideology, and they punished the leaders who were at the forefront of this, and this was part of removing the identity, and that's what you have in, for example, Deuteronomy chapter 7, where those identity markers, the Asherah poles, the shrines, the altars, and so forth, that was what was to be removed. And as you look at the Israelites and how they interact with the Canaanites, both with the patriarchs in Genesis and beyond, you see that there is one. Of course, Rahab is accepted within the people of Israel. You have strangers at the end of Joshua chapter 8 in Shechem, who are at this covenant renewal ceremony. These Canaanites who are joining the people of Israel, and also you have in chapter 11 it says that none of the Canaanite cities who knew about this God, who had delivered them, the Israelites, from Egypt, who had brought about the plagues on their gods and so forth, who had brought them across the Jordan River on dry ground and so forth, that they knew who this God was, and so it says, but none of them made peace with the Israelites. And there are various scholars, commentators on the book of Joshua, who say the implication here is that this could have been made available to them. But the goal is, and again, when you get to Judges chapter 2, the angel of the Lord comes to the people and opposes them, not because they hadn't, quote, wiped out the Canaanites, but rather because they continued to worship the gods of the Canaanites. That really this was these identity markers, the influence of the Canaanites was really what was at issue here, and that you see many Canaanites who are still dwelling in the land, even up to the time of Solomon. But as you look at the biblical record, you see that that God had brought the Israelites into the land, and the problem was not that the Canaanites were still around, but rather the Israelites did not destroy those things that led to they did not destroy the things that led them to compromise their mission and identity as the people of God, and so they engaged in those practices and worshipped those images that the Canaanites did. So I think that that's the broader picture that we have going on here. But we can come back to that if you like. But again, I didn't call the Canaanites Nazis. I was just using that as a point of comparison, that there's a dismantling of this religion, as it were.
For more conversations between Christians and skeptics, subscribe to the Unbelievable podcast. And for more updates and bonus content, sign up to the Unbelievable newsletter.